Hola, welcome to another episode of the Chicana Therapist Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Xochilt Alamillo, and today we're going to talk about one of my favorite things to talk about as a clinician, and that is raising adolescents. Now, notice I said my favorite thing to talk about, not necessarily my favorite thing to do, because I guess I kind of still am raising adolescents because my youngest is still 19, and well, a lot of this applies to them as well, but there's definitely different phases to adolescence, and it wasn't my favorite for some of my kids. It was fine. For others, it was more difficult. So I can definitely relate to a lot of parents that I work with. And I've also worked a lot with adolescents. So I get to hear that side of it too. And today we're going to be talking about that. This is the first topic that was requested of the podcast. And I am more than happy to get into it. So to start us off, I want to just say that it's just like they say, right? We don't get a manual about how to become a parent. We don't get a little book. We don't get directions. And nobody can really tell you what it's going to be like to parent a teenager because it's different for every teenager. It's different. I have 3 kids myself, and they all behaved very differently, went through very different things as adolescents. And so even if someone tried to prepare you, there really isn't a whole lot of things that they could predict. So today we're talking about raising teenagers, raising adolescents, some of the brain science behind it, some of the cultural tensions that arise, and also the reframe that might help you change the way you see how you show up for teenagers in your life, not just your kids, but any other teenagers that you love and care for and that you want to support. I feel like there are entire courses of how to work with teenagers, and that's not what I want this episode to be about. I want this episode just to be kind of an overview of some of the core themes I notice when working with parents and adolescents. And I don't expect this episode to be like a manual or anything, but I do want to get your gears moving, changing your perspective when it comes to raising teenagers versus raising younger children. And because there does have to be almost like a reanalysis of how you're going to approach this. And so that's what I'm hoping that you get from this episode. So yes, it will be brief as most of my episodes are, but hoping to get a conversation started, and I'm happy to go more into depth if anyone requests it. There are a few common themes I hear when I've heard parents talk about their adolescent. One is the kid who was your chicle, who was always with you and looked up to you and did all the things, is suddenly pulling away, and they went from seeing you as like the light of their eyes. Suddenly everything you do annoys them, or they have opinions about what you do, and it all seems to be that you do everything wrong. And to add to that, if you grow up in a Latinx household, respeto y obediencia, I had to really focus to say obediencia, respect and obedience were the foundation. A lot of us grew up in a home that was like you were expected to do what you were told. No rezongar, no talk back, no none of that. You just did what you were told. And so, especially if you're now the first generation raising teens in this country, you can get disoriented when a teenager starts to push back and starts to do things that you think to yourself, I would never have done that or said that to my mom. And they're doing it with their full chest, and you don't know how to react. Or you're reacting the way that your parents might have reacted, and that is just making things worse. So today we're going to talk more about the reason behind why teenagers behave the way that they do. So a little bit about the brain, some of the cultural tensions that you might be experiencing. And I also want to get into like, what do we do then? What are we supposed to do? What should we focus on? Because I don't want to say a solution because that's not accurate, but what should we be focusing on to have a better relationship with our teenagers. So those of you who are raising a teen, who have small children and that will eventually get to be teenagers, or you just love a teenager in your life, then this episode hopefully is helpful for you. So let's start with the brain, because this is something that I never skip. I have done a few talks and presentations and workshops around why teenagers behave the way they do, why they think the way they do. And it does seem to change things for parents when they hear it, because one of the things, especially when your child goes from they're your best friend and they're always with you and they admire you to not doing that, it can be really jarring. And so the first thing I talk to parents about is to try not to take it personally. And that is a big piece of it, because we're human and things hurt our feelings, and they say things that hurt our feelings. They do things that hurt our feelings. And so it's hard not to, but that's the first thing that I tell parents is try not to take things personally, because that can really change the way you respond. So in regards to the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of your brain, this front, like forehead, behind your forehead area, is responsible for making decisions. It's just responsible for impulse control. It's responsible for planning, for understanding consequences, and it's also responsible for regulating our emotions, the executive function of it all. And that might sound familiar if you have ADHD. It's also the part of our brains that is affected with ADHD, our executive function that is in our prefrontal cortex. So what we know is that part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, is not developed until it used to be age 25. Now scientists think that it might be closer to 30. And, we've always heard that boys take a little longer than girls. But yeah, they think that it might be closer to 30, which would honestly explain a lot regarding some of our behaviors in our 20s. So a teenager is not being difficult on purpose. They're not making decisions that you wouldn't make on purpose. Their brain is still developing. Now, I want to be clear, that doesn't mean that, they made poor decisions and, that's their prefrontal cortex, we shouldn't do anything about it. That's not what I'm saying. It's not an excuse. It's an explanation. So oftentimes they'll do things or say things that you're like, what were you thinking? And that's the thing, they were not. That part of their brain was not responding at the time. And, we hear a lot and we experience maybe that our teenagers might be really dramatic, big emotions. Again, this is a part of their brain that's still regulating. So they might be 6 feet tall and acting like a toddler. And that might be because it's hard to regulate your emotions when that part of your brain is not fully developed. Now, let me back up a little. I'm talking about teenagers, which usually we're talking about between 13 and 19. But honestly, these things can start and sometimes might even be worse in the preteen. So we're talking 10, maybe even 9, 10, 11, 12. You're already seeing like the tweenagers, the tween era, and they can be coming pretty hard for you. That's normal. That's still puberty. I don't know why we just call it adolescence, but there you have it. And what is fully online in their adolescent brain is the part of their brain that is emotional, that is seeking rewards, that likes taking risks. So you have a young person with an overdeveloped or an activated emotional accelerator and an underdeveloped brake, if you will. And so that is the reality that we're working with when we're thinking about teenagers. Again, this is why teenagers make decisions that might seem super irrational to adults, and why they know what they're doing is not a good idea and they do it anyway. And then they also feel like peer approval is more urgent than your approval, because developmentally they are wired and they are in the stage of life where they prioritize social connections with their friends, with their peers at this stage. It's not a character flaw. It is literally what teenagers are wired to do. It's the stage in life that they are. If we think about Erikson's developmental stages, according to his theory, depending on what age you are, you have a certain goal in life. And for teenagers, it's identity versus role confusion. So this trying to build up who they are and how others see them. And so it's very normal for them to prefer hanging out with their friends as opposed to hanging out with you. And again, executive function is still developing, and so it's hard for them to organize and plan. It's definitely hard for them to manage their time and follow through with things. And so sometimes you're like, man, why can't this kid just get it together? They forget everything. They're overwhelmed by things. This is when we see that like their room, it might be a mess. And you're like, all you have to do is pick this up. Their executive function is still under construction, and so they might need a few more accommodations to help them accomplish these tasks because their brain is just not cooperating. So basically, teenagers act the way they might act because of biology, and it can be in all kinds of levels. I've seen kids go, or teenagers go from, literally the parents will say, they went to my biggest fan to my biggest hater, all kinds of things. And it's biology. It's the brain trying to develop. It's the body, the hormones, it's everything put together. And so as always, I want to bring in culture. As a Latinx community, many of us anyway, were raised with this parenting model of like authoritarian. You do what your parents tell you, and that's it. You did what they said. You did not question their authority. You certainly didn't talk back. The family came first for everything, always, and you knew what your role was. And I think that there's value in that model, right? It creates belonging. It keeps families close. It worked for many generations. But being raised here in the United States might be different than what your parents were used to, or even if you have been in the US for generations, times have changed, right? And a lot of tension can arise from this teenager trying to be their own self, their individual. They're trying to form their own identity, their own values, their own sense of themselves, separate from their family. And to us, that might look like pushing back. It might look like questioning, especially authority. Like I said, it could look like they want to spend more time with friends than with family. And for many of us, that can be seen as disrespectful. We're like, what is this betrayal? Because again, it might be something that we weren't allowed to do, even if we'd wanted to. And so that's where some tension can start to develop. And as a therapist, the most common thing I see in my work is with parents who want to be the authority. They basically bring me their kid and they're like, fix them because they're not listening to me. They don't do what I say. They question everything. They want to have, as parents, the final word, unquestioned. And here we have a teenager who developmentally is pushing towards being themselves. And I've noticed that the harder a parent clamps down, the harder that a parent is trying to seize that teenager's autonomy, the harder that teenager pushes back. And again, it's not because the teenager doesn't love their family. It's just that they're doing what their brain is telling them to do. And in addition to that, it's telling them what this country and this American culture tells them you're supposed to do. So it's a couple things pushing back. Please, if you haven't listened to my episode on being bicultural, that also speaks to this. And another collision I see is around social connection. So in our Latinx culture, familismo is a beautiful value. Family is central. Family is your people, but sometimes that value gets really rigid. So when a teenager tries to make friends outside of the family, sometimes parents or caregivers see that as like competition or threatening, and it can really isolate a young person at a moment in their lives when peer connection is essential to their well-being. It's great when they have cousins that are their age. That can alleviate some of that, but sometimes they don't. Or sometimes their cousins are just not into the same things that they are, so they seek that connection elsewhere. So a constant message that I give parents, and honestly, I had to remind myself this multiple times when my kids were younger, is that you have to focus on raising the child that you have and not the child that you want. Again, I speak about this a lot when I talk about raising bicultural kids. I know that sounds simple, but it's not for everyone. And I've seen this time and again that a lot of parents, and this is not just Latinx culture, I think this is across all cultures, we want to parent the child that we imagined, or even the child that we thought we were. The one who shares their values without question, who wants what they want for them, and that child wants it too, who's becoming this person that you envisioned as a parent. And then you have a kid who is different in their interests from what you imagined. Their interests are different, their identity is different, their temperament is different, the path that they want to take is different. And so your relationship suffers because it's clear to that child that they've disappointed you by being themselves. And that's where some of the pain can come in for that child. And then it's just this cycle. And I know that that's really hard for us to accept. I see it a lot with people who really wanted a kid to be into the same music as them and to just be interested in a lot of the things they were interested in as a kid. And sometimes that's true. They raise a kid who shares interests, and that's great, but sometimes not. And the worst thing you can do is show disappointment in that. And the research is clear that teens thrive when they feel like they're known by their parents, when they're allowed to be themselves, no matter how different from the parents or family that is, not a kid that's managed or molded, but just known and seen for who they are. When the parents can look at their kid and say, I see who you are, and I'm interested in that person, they feel like they could do anything. And that changes so many things. So my advice to parents is to try to be a guide or a coach, not a boss, not a manager, because you're not trying to control the outcome. It's to stay close enough that when they need you, they can come to you, and they know that you have a strong enough relationship that they know that if they mess up or they make a mistake or something happens, they trust you, and they'll trust that you'll respond to who they are, not who you need them to be. Not, ya ves, I told you so. Another thing is that social connection really does matter at a teenager stage. So support their friendships as long as they're safe, healthy friendships. Try to get to know their friends if you can. And don't make them choose between family and peers. Build, a culture that has room for both of them. If you can invite the friends, allow the friends to come to family things, that kind of thing. And this is one of the hard ones for people sometimes that are Latinx, is give them age appropriate freedom and trust. Give them an opportunity to earn it. Give them an opportunity to keep it. And they will have less reason to seek doing things behind your back. Won't always be the fail proof, but again, give them the opportunity to earn and keep your trust. And if they lose it for a bit, give them opportunities to earn it again. Another thing is set clear expectations for them. And when they don't meet them, or if they don't meet them, don't attack their character, because it's so different when you tell your kid that behavior is not okay. It's different than when you say, you are not okay, you are a disappointment. So one addresses the action and the other just wounds the person. A teenager will recover from a consequence. They will recover from losing privileges. But carrying a parent's contempt for a long time can become ongoing and affect your relationship with them, as well as just affect any relationship that they have. So what can we do? What are some things we can do to make this period in their lives less stressful for both of us? So here's some of the things that both my research and my clinical experience tells me that teens need most from their parents. The first one is connection before correction. So before you address behavior, address the relationship. If a teen feels connected to you as a person, like they have a relationship, you have a relationship of parent, child, they're much more receptive to your guidance than one that feels that every interaction is a performance review, one that feels like you're always only telling them what they did wrong instead of noticing who they are and noticing what they do right and noticing what they're working on and showing them that your love for them is unconditional even when they make mistakes. Another is curiosity over interrogation. I think a lot of us do the how was your day, and teenager might be just like whatever. And other people have suggested things like be more specific, like what was the best part of your day or the worst part of your day. And you don't have to do it that way, but I will say that trying to get a conversation out of your child just to get to know them is different than trying to get information from your child. Ask about what they're interested genuinely without judging them and without just trying to monitor, like who'd you sit with lunch? Why'd you sit with that person? Try to get to know them as a person. Even if some of the things they tell you, you're like, why would you think that? Why would you say that? Again, their brain is developing. Try to not be judgmental about what they share with you and be genuine, not faking interest, not just trying to monitor. Another thing that might be hard for us, but I think this is true with any relationship, and that goes with relationships with your teen, is to repair when you get it wrong, because we will always get things wrong. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to say messed up things. We're going to lose our patience a lot. We're going to respond in mean ways. And while we can try to avoid that as much as possible, none of us are perfect. And what matters most is that you're willing to come back and tell your kid, I'm sorry, I messed up. And not only are you repairing a rupture in your own relationship with them, but you're also teaching them that relationships can survive rupture and that you can be held accountable and that it doesn't have to involve shame all the time. That's another thing. We're constantly trying to correct by shaming our teenagers, and I can guarantee you that never really works. And lastly, because I wouldn't be me if I didn't talk about this, let them have their own relationship with culture and identity, especially for bicultural kids. They're navigating two worlds, two sets of expectations, two versions of who they're supposed to be. And there's a lot of pressure attached to that to perform cultural identity and in a specific way. And I would say, as hard as it might be, let them find their own relationship to their roots. Teach them, arrímalos, take them, show them, talk to them, but trust that what you've given them is in there somewhere, even if it doesn't look the way you expected. Because some of the biggest shame that we see towards kids comes from their own parents. And I'm guilty of this too. It's like when they mispronounce a word in Spanish, where you're like, oh my gosh, that's not how you say it. Or we ourselves can call our kids no sabo kids when they have told you that's hurtful for them. Or we'll say like, oh, you don't even eat spicy food, right? We use a lot of shame to build culture. And I can tell you that doesn't work. And so trying to be mindful of that, even though a lot of us maybe grew up with that, being mindful of that. If something is hurting your kid, believe them. I want to close by saying that you're not a failure because sometimes parenting feels hard. Teenagers are supposed to feel hard to parent. It's developmental. Your job is to stay in relationship with them through all of it and love them unconditionally. Your job is to be the person they can come back to whenever, even when they're pushing you away and act like they don't care and they don't want you around. Your job is to be around when they change their mind or when they make a mistake or when you need to comfort them. So remember to raise the child that you have. Remember to try to be their guide. Stay close, but don't try to be too close. Focus on the relationship because that's what they'll carry with them long after they become adults and move out. Thank you so much. If this episode was helpful for you, I encourage you to share it with others. I encourage you to rate it wherever you get your podcast. And I encourage you to reach out and let me know if there is a topic that you would like me to focus on for future podcasts. And of course, as of the time of this recording, I am recording this well ahead of time, but we still have 2 spots left in our Oaxaca retreat for Latinas. Please go to my website at thechicanatherapist.com and click on retreats to get more information. We would really love to have you join us and to help you and support you in reconnecting with yourself. Again, I'm also on social media. I'm on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and I have a blog that I send out when I have new episodes, and you can also sign up for that on my website. In the meantime, thank you so much for your support. Cuídense mucho, and I will see you at the next episode. Thank you for listening. This podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. Nothing shared in this podcast constitutes therapy, clinical advice, or a therapeutic relationship. Listening to this podcast does not establish a provider-client relationship, and if you're experiencing a mental health crisis or in need of clinical support, please contact a licensed mental health professional or call or text 988 Crisis Hotline.